Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friday's Focus on Finances. My name is Jamie Fleming, and today we are going to talk about 3 rules to consider and remember when it comes to your investments. We're going to change it up a little bit today. I'm going to do a presentation for you so that we can illustrate some of these areas a little bit better. You can see some of the numbers and how your investments may be affected both positively and negatively in certain situations. So we'll have some illustrations to go by, and as you know, I spend a lot of time talking about the planning aspects of people's finances, also about really figuring out what your risk tolerance is when it comes to investing. Most people put the cart before the horse and they start investing before they really know how to really assess their needs and how they should be investing. So hopefully with today's 3 rules to consider, it'll give you a chance of going into the right direction. It does not replace planning. It also definitely does not replace really assessing what your risk tolerances are before you start putting monies into the marketplace. So I'm going to share my screen here so that we can take care of a couple of housekeeping areas, because in my industry, when we talk about investing, we have to really make sure we go through a few disclosure areas so that we can do this in a cautionary way so that you can actually get the most out of this, but also kind of a don't try this at home situation. So I want you to take a look at this, but I actually have to read the information to you so you have it. The materials provided by us, Fleming and Associates, and it contains general information to help you understand basic financial strategies. Throughout the presentation, we may generally discuss different financial vehicles. However, nothing we say should be construed as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial vehicle, nor should it be used to make decisions today about your current strategy. The goal of the presentation today is to expose you to ideas on financial vehicles that may help you work towards your financial goals. So please understand that we cannot make any promises or guarantees that you'll accomplish such goals. Insurance and annuity products are guaranteed and backed by the financial strength and claims paying ability of those issuing companies. The presentation is designed to provide general information on the subjects covered. It is not, however, intended to provide specific legal, tax, or investment advice, and cannot be used to avoid tax penalties or to promote market or recommend any tax plan or arrangement. And please note that myself and our firm, Fleming and Associates, we're not giving legal, tax, or investment advice here. You're encouraged to consult with qualified professionals before making any such purchases or investing decisions. Myself, as the speaker and sponsor of today's information, is presented as, again, educational information to you. It's not related to, endorsed by, or connected with, and not approved by any government agency or organization. And despite efforts to be accurate and current, this presentation may contain out-of-date information. We are under no obligation to advise you of any subsequent changes related to the topics discussed in the presentation. The information and opinions contained herein are provided by third parties and have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. And at the end of today's talk, like always, we'll provide you with an opportunity to contact us for a one-on-one consult to discuss your specific circumstances, but there's no obligation to do that. So you can see why a lot of time, even though I talk a lot about financial planning and giving you tools in that way, when we start diving into the investment field, we have to go through this process to make sure that it's kind of a don't try this at home situation. And we really do need to make you aware that you should consult professionals in this arena, whether it's a tax professional, a estate planning attorney or a certified financial advisor or insurance agent when you go to implement these areas. So please do that when you get your goals down, get the advice of people that are in the field, and just make sure that it covers your needs. And so with that said, let's get going. I am going to cover some of the 3 most important rules that you need to remember when it comes to timing, when it comes to time to invest for your retirement. And here's what I can tell you: if you pay attention to these 3 rules, the odds that everything's going to work out for you in your retirement financially are remarkably improved. And the odds of things working out for you are that much higher if you just pay attention to really 3 simple rules. And we're going to go through these one by one. And I want to also let you know, because I've had people ask questions with this presentation, I'm not able to see your comments as they're coming in, but please do write them and I will address them if they're not answered during this presentation. So let's go through these again one by one so you can have a better understanding. Rule number 1, always remember that losses hurt you far more than gains help you. So we're going to take a look at an example of what I'm talking about here. And we're going to imagine that you're going to start out by, one of the things that people do all the time, and it's in jest, but people are serious and they do invest this way. People are always asking me, what's a hot stock tip? So let's imagine that you have a hot stock tip, or you have a stock that you really want to invest in. And let's imagine you started 2 years ago, and you said, I've got $100,000 and I want to put it into stock A because I think it is the next greatest thing since sliced bread. You take your 100,000 and you put it into the company that you've selected. You start with the 100 grand, and in the first year you did really well and you increased your investment by 60%. Now, ongoing, you can imagine that that's not an expectation you should have year after year. However, coming off of the year 2020, there were incredible amounts of gains in the market. So I'm using these examples because they are things that have happened. And I also use this example so that you can see what the potential risks are. So let's imagine in the first year, you made 60%. So your 100,000 has grown to 160,000, right? And now you're feeling like you have just hit the jackpot, right? You know what you're doing. You've been sharing all your winnings and your gains with your friends, and you're feeling pretty good, right? And so the first year you made a killing, and if you're investing and talking to your friends about it, anytime we can make a killing, we can't help ourselves. We want to brag a little bit, right? And tell the world like how brilliant we are. So you're on cloud 9 and you're as happy as can be. And then year 2 comes along, and in that year, you find out that you lost 40%. Now, this is also not unreasonable, as many people experienced in March of 2020 when we had a 38% decline in the market in just a couple of days. So these are all very realistic things that can happen in the market, right? So now this happens, and now you're down 40%, and you're thinking, okay, that's pretty crummy, but I did so well. I was up 60% the first year, right? The next year I'm down 40%. You're not talking about this in the same fashion with all your friends at this point, right? Because now you're down 40%. You're not feeling quite as good about it, but you're still feeling pretty good. And 60% one year, 40% the other, that's really looking at, oh, well, I'm still up 20%. And over a 2-year period time frame, that's average of 10% a year. But then you start doing some of the math, okay? What is your real total return here. So we're going to look at some math here because it's so important to really look at this. And when you're looking at investments and you can look at history and it says, oh, on average over the last 10 years, this investment has done 10%, then some people wonder, well, why isn't my portfolio up on average 10% a year? And this is why. We're actually going to look at some math here to help you put this in perspective. So the problem is this, right? It's the time to start marrying the math with your money to see what this really looks like. So let's do the math again. You start with 100 grand, and remember that the first year you were up 60%. 60% of 100,000 is a $60,000 gain, right? So the first year you have your 100,000 plus your 60,000, and you're at 160,000. Not bad. You're feeling pretty good, and that's probably exactly what you were thinking, right? And this is where we were on cloud nine because we did really well, right? And so then we get to year two and feeling a little crummy because now we've noticed that our stock selection is down 40%, which is less than 60. So we're thinking we're still ahead of the game, right? You're down 40%, but you're down 40% on 160,000, right? So you lose the 40%, but when you do the math, it's unnerving because 40% times 160,000, that's $64,000 loss. So you have to subtract the 64,000 from the 160, and you're at 96,000, which is less than where you started. So where you were starting to congratulate yourself, right? Because year over year, you felt like, oh, I did pretty good. I'm still up 20%, and you felt like you averaged 10% a year, right, over the 2-year time frame, and you still managed to lose money. So I do this with people because it's hard for people to realize, if you have 100,000 and you have a 50% loss, you're at 50,000. You have to double your money to get back. You have to have 100% on your money to recuperate that 50% loss. So your average 10% per year does not give you overall 20% increase. And so it happens all the time this way. And then people get very frustrated because without thinking about it, you feel like you should be further ahead. So this is why we can say losses hurt you more than gains help you, right? In part because of the sequence of the events. So we're going to look at this, right? We're going to look at this expressed in a different way. This is a chart that actually demonstrates the gains required to offset a loss. So if you look at this chart and you look at the loss of 10%, you actually need 11% gain to offset that loss, right? If you do the math, we can do the math in our head. Let's say you started with 100,000. If you're down 10%, you're down to 90,000. So how much do we need to make up for that loss? You've got to make up $10,000, but you're making it up on 90,000. So you need to make 10,000 on 9,000 on 90,000. That is 11% that you have to gain to get back to square one. Let's look at the 20%, the math for 20%. This might be a little easier to do the numbers. So let's look at the 20% option. 20% option here, okay? If we do the math on the same 100,000, you're down 20%, you're down 20,000. So 100,000 minus 20,000 is 80,000. That leaves you with 80,000. Now you want to get back to your 100,000. So you need to make up that 20,000 loss, but you have to make it up on the 80,000 you have now. What that means is that you need to make 20,000 on 80,000, and that's a 25% gain that you need to offset your 20% loss. So you see, that's why we talk about how much more a loss affects our situation than a gain benefits us. So a lot of times when I'm working with clients and we're managing portfolios, we talk a lot about managing the downside risk, because we know that if we can manage the downside risk, then any kind of correction in the market, our clients are going to have an easier time recovering if we're managing the negative. So if we can minimize the negative, that will give us better opportunity when the markets are in the positive, right? So this it's interesting, right? But it does work both ways. Let's do it the other way around, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So the other way around is that if you start with 100,000 and you make 25% in the first year, that means you're up 125,000, right? How much of a loss would you need the next year to offset the gain? You only need a 20% decrease and you're back to square one again. So see, you have to gain a whole lot more, and it doesn't take as much of a loss to just wipe away that 25% gain. So you have to look at those pieces of the puzzle. You saw in the first example, a 40% loss wiped out a 60% gain. So we have to be mindful of those things, especially when the market's very volatile. You know, I use the example of having 100,000, losing 50%. Now you have 50,000. You have to make 50,000 on your 50,000 to get back to square one. That's a 100% gain. That's not the average of what people go into the markets. It's situational. We saw that a lot in 2021. I'm sorry, in 2020. But it's not something that people should have as a strategy going year after year if you don't want to take the risk that goes with the downside. So hopefully that makes sense when we're talking about gains and what you need to do to overcome losses. So we're going to move on to rule number 2, because what we see with rule number 2 on this slide is that losses, like we said, hurt you more than gains, but they hurt you even more when you're having to take income. This happened a lot last year for people that weren't even in retirement because of either loss of job or people had their hours cut or their salaries reduced. So if you're having to take income in a time where you're already experiencing a loss, then it makes the situation even worse. So let's look at an example here to put it in perspective, okay? We can start with the same 100,000, and let's say it's a bad year. And in a bad year, let's say you lost 20%, okay? So that 100,000 is now 80,000, right? Because you lost that 20,000. But let's say on top of that, you had to take out 4,000 to supplement your income, okay? When you do that, now your 20% loss is actually a 24% loss. You had your loss of the market loss of 20%, then you had to take out 4,000. That total downside is 24,000 for the year. So you're actually down 24%. So these are things to really look at. And that's one of the reasons why when we construct portfolios, it's important for us to know, is there a chance that you have to take money from that? And what if the market's down when you need those monies? So that's why emergency reserves are critical. That's why income planning as you get into retirement is critical, because we want you to have a steady income without having to tap into your investment portfolio. So if there is a correction in the market, you have time for that portfolio to recover and not have to take money out when it's a down market. So to make things even worse, if you're in that situation and you're having to supplement your income, then what if you have to take 4,000 out the following year? Now you could potentially be down almost 30,000, and now you only have 72,000 left over. So you can see where this gets really bad really fast, and you really have to be mindful of how you're investing and what your goal is. So let's look at this in an illustration just to give you a little bit more insight to how devastating this can be. And we could look at this because of the time necessary to recover when you have a loss. And then, of course, when you have a loss and you're taking out income at the same time, like we said, that makes it even worse for your situation. So if we look at this, this chart illustrates the percentage that would be needed in order to recover to be even if you were to lose a percentage due to market decline. based on two scenarios. The first one is without taking money out for income, and the other is while taking out 5% withdrawal for income. So you can see the differences. So if you see the chart, we look at the chart, if you started with 500,000 without taking money out for income, and you have a 5% loss in that first year, then you would need to earn 5.26% in order to make up the difference. All right. If you lost 5% and were also withdrawing 5% for income, you would need 11.11% to recover just to break even. And if this is an income portfolio and you're in retirement, 11.11% is a pretty hefty return. And you probably have to take more risks than you should to get that return for recovering. So investing involves risks, including the potential loss of your principal. So when you're investing in the stock market, there's no investment strategy in the stock market that can guarantee a profit or protect against loss in periods of declining values. So that's why knowing how to invest, the strategy behind it, and what your goals are, that's why I always talk about planning first and then investing second. Let's look at rule number 3. If you're not sure how to manage risk, a good starting point is to remember the rule of 100. So we're going to talk about what is the rule of 100. And it's actually very simple. And remember that when you're younger, you have more time. You have a longer time horizon, so you can take more risk with your money. When you're older, you should take less risk with your money, right? And so that's kind of a self-explanatory thing. I mean, it's kind of a duh, Jamie, we know this, right? We're younger, we can take more risk. When we're older, we can't. But think about it in another way. Let's say you have a 25-year-old, how she would invest money compared to perhaps her parents. Let's say they're in their 80s or older, right? Should the 25-year-old maybe invest a little bit more aggressively than the 80-year-old? And the answer is, well, of course, right? Because she has a much longer time horizon. If she loses money at any given point in her early years, it isn't as big of a deal because she has a lot of time to make up for losses. However, her parents, who could be 70s, 80s, they don't have the same time horizon to make up significant losses. And you saw what that takes in the other two rules. Now, is there an equation we can use to help kind of figure out how much risk a 25-year-old should take versus an 82-year-old? And of course there is. So we're going to share this. And it's a concept, so keep that in mind. It's a rule of thumb, but it's a starting point. So I wouldn't rely on this 100%, but it gets you in the right direction. So again, this is a concept called the rule of 100, and basically it goes like this. You take 100, you subtract your age, and the remainder is the amount that you could have at risk. This is not a hard and fast rule, but it's a rule of thumb that helps provide guidance. So let's use the example of the 25-year-old. If we use this rule with her, 100 minus 25, the result is 75. For the 25-year-old, that means roughly 75% of her money could be at risk, whereas maybe only 25% of her money should be in a little safer area. And what about the parents that are 82? And let's just use 80 for math's sake. Take 100 minus 80, only 20%, roughly 20% of their money should be at risk. And then 80% should be in a safer environment, not subject to market loss. So when we talk about money that's safer, money that's at risk, what are we really talking about? So we're going to look at this. And again, this is just trying to bring it down most simplistically, bare bones here. So you have a way, something to use as guidance, right? On the left-hand side, here's a list of things that we could say are riskier accounts. Risk simply means that there's potential to lose money. So what are we talking about here? Basically all stocks. When we're talking about bonds here, we're talking about things like corporate bonds, bonds that have default risk, okay? All mutual funds. So even bond mutual funds are on the left side because bond mutual funds are traded on the market. So there is risk, there is potential for loss. And then all exchange traded funds. Those are your ETFs, right? All variable annuities, limited partnerships. Now, I have it Cedra here because we can go on and on. We can include options and commodities and futures and real estate. Real estate is on the list because you can lose money in real estate. And for those of you who owned real estate and income properties in 2008, 2009, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of people lost their homes and their investment properties. Many people struggled in 2020, with our current pandemic and the things that were put in place to protect renters, to not have to pay rent through December of last year. The problem with that is that it was very one-sided. The owner still had to pay the mortgage, and there was no relief for property owners, even though renters were put in a position of not getting evicted or having to pay rent. It put a lot of property owners at risk. Many people had to sell their properties. Some people lost their properties, have defaulted on their properties. So real estate is definitely on the list. And of course, we can put cryptocurrencies on the list as well. So it could go on and on the left-hand side. Really anything that you could lose money should go on the left-hand side. The right-hand side lists things that are considered safe. And what does that mean? That means your principal's either insured or guaranteed by some entity. And that would include things like cash, savings, checking, CDs, accounts that you have at a bank, could also include individual government bonds, treasury bonds, savings bonds, inflation bonds. It would also include things like fixed annuities, or fixed indexed annuities. This isn't on here, but again, etc. would also include high cash value life insurance policies, things of that nature. So basically, all the right-hand side items are things where your principal is insured and guaranteed. You're not subject to loss. So the rule of 100 says that the percent that should be at risk, so for the 25-year-old, she would look at putting 25% of her money on things on the right-hand side and 75% into things on the left-hand side. So again, with her parents at 80, they would only have 20% on the left-hand side, and 80%, the lion's share of their money, would be on the safe side on the right-hand side. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of new information on how to assess risk as a guideline. You can look at your current investments and see how close are you to this rule of 100 to see if you're off kilter one way or the other. I have a lot of clients who are on the younger side, and because they aren't sure how to invest, they may be too heavily invested on the right-hand side, and they're not taking advantage of time in the market, and a lot of them are putting too much money here and not keeping up with inflation. So their money's having to work really hard. So it goes both sides. So what if you say, well, I don't like that rule. I'm smarter than that, and you have too much at risk. What is the problem with violating this rule? And well, here is the problem. You open yourself up to potentially experiencing significant losses of principal during periods of market turmoil. And if you've been around and investing since 2008 and current, we had this really horrible economic and housing crisis go on. Many people experienced significant losses. And then let's say you just started investing, say in 2010, and you've been investing for the last 10 years. You've been the beneficiary of one of our longest bull markets in history. And so a lot of times when that happens, and it happened prior to 2008, is that people got overconfident because we were, again, at the end of a long bull market where the market was just increasing, and too much money was put at risk. And people feel like their risk tolerance is higher when things are good, but you really find out what your risk tolerance is when things are volatile and you start seeing significant loss during the periods of market turmoil. So the problem for most people that are too risky in their investments closer to retirement is that you don't have enough time to make the money back, where the 25-year-old has plenty of time, so they can take a little bit more risk, knowing that over time it's not going to have a significant negative impact on their situation. And then when you combined taking too much risk at a time where you also have to take income, well, then that just really exasperates the problem. And you're really figuring out now by my discussion of why people are sometimes afraid they're going to outlive their money. And much of the time is because they haven't invested appropriately over the years and are having to do more risky things, at least they feel like that, towards the end of their earning years. And if there's a market correction right before you need the funds, then it's going to put you at jeopardy. So now that we've talked about some of these things, what do you do next? So here's three things. Like, the first is, if we're already working together and executing your plan, this likely doesn't necessarily apply to you, but understanding your situation more is always a good thing. So hopefully you got some additional information if you are a current client and you're listening in today. Number two, you could just simply ignore the issue, right? People do that all the time because there may be analysis to paralysis. They don't know what to do, so they just don't think about it. I do not recommend number two. This usually does not help your situation in a positive way. And again, the more you ignore it, the more time goes by and the less likely things are just going to work themselves out. And now you have a shorter time horizon. And then, of course, number three, which is the one I always recommend, is call, set up a consultation. If you haven't already planned for this, then let's sit down and see if we can't plan it together. Answer questions, figure out what is the best scenario for you. I tell you each week that we offer complimentary consultations. And what I am really happy to say is that from this, more and more people are taking advantage of it and realizing that working with a professional right away, they can see the benefits of going through and having this plan. Thanks, Amanda, for showing up today. Appreciate it. So I highly recommend, let us know what your questions are. Take advantage of the complimentary consultation because you have absolutely nothing to lose, and you'll probably gain so much more insight on your situation and figure out how to develop and implement a plan that makes sense for you and lessen all the stress that the financial worries have possibly been creating in your world. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next week on Friday's Focus on Finances. Bye, everybody.